Hi there and welcome to my next quick tutorial. I'm going to do a real quick one that was a request to have how to open a door, how to get a door animation and how to get the door animation to trigger. So I've set up a really simple scene, and there is a link in the description for this video of where to download this entire project. So if you go to GitHub, you can follow that link to GitHub. You'll see the project start is here. You can click clone or download and just download that zip and extract the zip somewhere on your hard drive, and then just use Unity to open up that project. Once you have that, you'll be up and running, ready to go, and we can get started with this project. So once you have this project up and running, you'll be able to see have a really simple player, mouse control, and you can walk up to this door and nothing happens. So we're going to make that door trigger and open up. The first thing we need to do is to create the animation. Now if you're going to set this up yourself, which I hope you're watching this for, what you need to do is to make sure that the door, the part that you're going to move out of the way, is a child of the doorway, so the door frame or the wall that it's a part of. And the best way to make it is even an empty game object that acts as the doorway, and then you can have this moving part here. The reason for that is because the animation works as a child of that parent, so the animation only works in one particular direction. So when you animate this, if you animated it as a global thing, then the door would always go back to where you animated it to. So its position would be set in the animation, but we want the position to be set relative to the doorway. That probably make more sense if you get it wrong, but I'll try and explain it right this time. So we're going to create an animation for this door first up. So the way you do that is if you just go up to Window and then you do Animation. So the animation window usually pops up somewhere random, so I'm just going to drag the tab for the animation window up and dock it next to the console. I mentioned before about creating an animation for the top level object so that the door moves as a child of it. The reason for that is if you use this as a prefab and you use it later on, it'll work just as expected no matter where you put the doorway part, because the door will move as a child of the doorway rather than say globally, where you would set the position of it globally. You don't want to have to redo things if you can help it. So by making it this way, so by making it an animation on the doorway, you animate the door object as a child of it, and it will always move relative to it. So we have this all set up and ready to go, and we're going to create our first animation, which will be the door open animation. So what we're going to do is just click on Create to create an animation, making sure that we have the top level doorway selected. Click Create and it'll already put it in my assets folder. I could have a new folder for animations, but I'm just going to keep it simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I call this animation door open, and you'll see inside of your project it will have created an animation, which is the animation clip, and an animator controller, and we're going to get to the controller soon. So leave the controller alone and don't delete it. So we have the animation window open now, and you can see here that we have a timeline that we can scrub backwards and forwards, and we have properties that can change over time, and that's the basis of animation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of ways of doing it, and hopefully one of them will make sense to you, depending on how complicated your animations get. The simplest thing to do is to click on Add Property. This allows you to add properties to the currently selected object or any of the children object as well. So the properties could be anything. We have any properties within a script can be changed over time, but we obviously want just a transform. So we're just going to say transform, and we're going to say position, and you can hit plus. So this will give me at where the little white line was is going to set a particular position, an X position for X, Y, and Z position for that door child object. So I think what I want to do is I'm pretty sure that should be 1, and puts it in the middle of the yeah, that should put it in the middle, and I'll move the white line forward again, and it's actually decided it's going to put it back to 0.87 for some reason. It's added an extra one, but I'm just going to put in maybe at 0.3 seconds. I'm going to just type straight in a value of -1. And I'm going to select these and just delete them. So I'm going to hit the delete key to get rid of those. So what I have is a simple animation from second 0, from the very start, all the way to 0.3 seconds, and I've got changing one property from the X position of the door, from 1 to -1. Another way of doing it is if you want to have a visual cue on what's happening, you can actually just move the door with the record key hit. So I will show you this one. It's up to you. This is simple enough that you can type values in. But if you hit the record key, and what we're going to have to do as well is, if you'll notice, if you click away on the door, it's expecting you to be animating the door. So I'll go back to doorway. We're going to hit the record key, but I'm also going to hit this lock, this little padlock. What it allows it to do is it just locks this animation, so it knows that I'm going to record for this animation even if I'm moving something else. So if I click on door right now, you'll see if I just sort of move it around, the keyframe could potentially get created here, and then I'm going to go along to 0.2 and I'll just move it back a little bit, so you'll see that it'll go from, I go quite slow and then it'll speed up at the end there. That was just one way of doing it, the animations as well. So if you just wanted to do it that way, you could end up creating an entire animation just with this, just by doing it this way. So whatever you have, wherever your white line is, and you position an object, then you go to where you want to the end, and you position your object just like this. And what it'll do is it'll do the interpolations between it. It'll fill in the frames in between. So that's another way of doing it. Now, if you're going to do it as a parent-child like I did, you need to make sure that you lock the with a little padlock, where my mouse is right now, so that you lock the animation window so that it knows you're still animating that animation window, and you hit the record, the live record. That's more or less it. So we have the door open animation. Next thing is to make the door close animation. So we've already got one animation, and you might wonder how we're going to make another animation on the same object. So you'll see where it says this is what we called our door open. You'll see it right here. It says that's the current clip that we're working on. I'm going to click create new clip, and I'm going to again give it a new name. So I'm going to try and keep the same convention. So I called the last one door open, so I'm going to say door close. And you can see that you can drop or swap between those clips that you're working on, just in the top here. So we want the door close animation. I'm just going to use the first method that we used before. So I'm going to add in a property of for the door, the child object, and its transform, and I'm going to add in this X position, sorry, the position property there. And because we want the door to be open at the beginning, I know for a fact that the open position is -1, and I'm going to go all the way to 0.3. I think I made the last one. I'll get rid of the end ones that it makes by default. So I'm going to go all the way to 0.3. I'm going to set the position to 1. So we have a very simple closing animation that starts open and then goes down to closed. So now we've got the door open, and we've got the door close animation clips, and we need to work on the controller now to make it work. I'm going to show you real quickly. If we double click the controller, you'll see you get this this controller window. If you've never seen this before, this is a state machine, so it basically tells you which state or which animation is playing. It's easier we'll work with it here, and then we're going to dock it so that we can actually see the game or the scene at the same time, so that way we can work without having to write any scripts just now. So we have a default state. Now if we're thinking about our door, it's actually closed by default. It's not, you don't want it to be doing anything. By default, if we were to run this, it would immediately play this door open animation, which is not what we want. So we're going to create a new state. So you right click on the space, click create state, and then choose empty. Now I'm going to just rename this state to idle, because it's an empty state and we don't want it to, it means it's not doing anything, and I'm going to right click on it and say set as layer default. So by default it'll do nothing, which is what we want. We want the door to sit there until we tell it to open. So in order to get it to play a particular animation clip, oh yeah, one thing is just make sure that the door close clip isn't looped. So you want to make sure this is unticked, and the door open as well, we want to untick the loop time as well, so that we don't end up with it constantly opening one time after the other. So the door open clip, we're going to make a transition from idle to door open. We normally do the animation with parameters, so we need to set a particular parameter in order to do that transition. So if we click parameters inside the animator window here, I've already made my parameter and I called it open. You can set the, oh yeah, I'll just show you again, so I'll just delete this one so we can do it again. So we click plus, we click bool, which is true or false, and we're going to call this open. So this will be set in code, but right now we can set it just by ticking it on or off. Open is going to be the parameter we use to set the transition. So we're going to set it from the idle to door open. We're going to right click, make a transition, and then drag the line to door open. So we want this to happen. So if you click on the transition line itself, you'll get a bunch of options coming up here. We're going to choose the condition. We're going to, first of all, we'll untick has exit time. So we want this to happen immediately, so we don't wait for some random length of time. And then we need to set a condition. You'll see the warnings here. So the condition we want, we've already made the parameter. The condition we want is that open is true. So if you hit that plus, you'll see that it gives you this option. So we can set the true or false value for this, for the condition. So by default, when you walk in, if this is set to false, it's going to do nothing until this is set to true, and then it's going to open the door. Now doors are a bit funny because you'd think you want it to go back to idle and do nothing, but that's not kind of the way it works. And we want this animation to finish, and because it's not looping, it will just finish, and it will stop, and it will not do anything further. But we do need a transition to make it close again, should we need to have it close. So the transition here goes back down this way, and we just have this the line. If you click on the line again, the transition, and the parameter we're going to use here is we're going to say that open is false. So if the open parameter turns to false, it will go to closing. And then last of all, we want to make another transition that just goes back up to the door open in case we happen to go backwards and forwards in front of the door and open it and close it, and we want to be able to go back. So that again, we click on we've made the transition, we click on the line, and we choose the parameter for this to be open is true. So if we want the door to be open, that is. So to test this out, the easiest thing to do is to take this animator window. I'm just going to dock it to the left so I can still see the parameter list, and I'm going to hit play. I'm going to just escape out and just watch the scene. So I've got the camera and the scene set up so I can see this. So it is playing, but if you click open, you'll see that it plays the open animation, and it will actually, if I click on doorway, it'll actually show you what animation it's playing as well. And if I untick it again, it should play the close animation. So you'll see the whole thing happening as expected. So just in the next bit, we're just going to set up a trigger and set this parameter in code. So I can close this animator window now because we know that it works. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create, have a little think about this, we're going to create the trigger object. And we want to get a handle to the animator, this doorway here, so we can set that open parameter to true or false based on whether we're in this trigger or not. Right now we don't have a trigger, we have the current mesh collider which we need to keep. But what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new one. So if we click add component, type in collider, and you should see box collider in the list. The box collider, we're going to make sure we set this one, because we've already got one convex collider on it. We're going to set this as a trigger, and then we can click edit collider to try and get it exactly where we need it. So you can see the little green dots at the corner. I'm going to drag those in approximately to the edge of the, a couple of units away. Yep, that's fair enough. A couple of units away from the doorway itself. And I'm going to drag this one and just pull it forward maybe 3 units or so, and 3 units back, something like that. Quite handy having the Pro Builder, because you can, by default, you have these lines that show you the distances. These are 1 meter each. So that's given me this big collider box that we're going to be able to check in code whether any object walks into it or out of it. So we can untick this edit collider now, and we have made sure that it is trigger, and now we need to do the code. So if we click add component, we're going to add in a new component of a new script. So I'm going to say new script, and I'm going to call this door trigger, keeping the correct conventions. So once you have the door trigger script attached, once it's kind of like compiled a little bit, you should see it's attached. So we have the trigger collider and the door trigger on at the same level as the animator, so they can all access each other fairly simply. So I'm going to double click on this and open up Visual Studio. So Visual Studio is up and running. It's a good idea to put your code comments in, so I'm just going to put in a little summary. So that's 3 forward slashes for the summary. I'm just going to say this will trigger the animations of the door. Now we're going to get the variables that we need. So we're going to just use this nice and simply. So if I look on doorway again, I need this script that I'm currently writing to access the animator component. So the easiest way to do that is I'm just going to say animator, that's it, and we'll call it animator. So there's a default sort of name for it that Visual Studio wants to give it, so it's a lowercase a for the variable name. So we're going to get that component inside of the start function. So animator equals get component, use the triangle brackets, and we want the animator component, brackets, brackets. So we're assuming that this is going to work and we'll get the animator component, otherwise we'll be in trouble. We don't think we need the update function just now, but what we do need to do is to overwrite the on trigger enter. So on trigger enter, if you start typing that in, will give you this, will complete this code for you. So on trigger enter will take the other collider. Now we should really check what the other collider is. Otherwise, for example, a bullet could trigger the door opening. We may want that or we may not. But to keep it simple, we can build up that in the next one maybe, but for now we just want to say that we'll assume that the only thing that's going to walk in there and trigger it will be the player. So if this gets triggered, open the door. So the way you do that is we get the animator and we use the set bool parameter, the set bool function. You can pass either an ID or the string name, and if you remember, I believe we called our, inside the animator, if I double click this one, I believe we called the parameter open, and it has to be exactly correct because we're going to use a string, so it's a capital O in there. So we're going to say inside of inverted commas open, and then a comma, and then what we want to set it to. So we want to set it to true. The opposite of this is if we type in on trigger exit, you'll see this is the opposite. So if something leaves the trigger area, then it will, we want to do the absolute opposite. So this would be, again, we're setting the bool. We're setting the bool that's named open, and we're going to set this to false. So fairly simple code. Nothing too flash in here. I probably should put in code comments. And yeah, we'll give that a test. So So I'm back in Unity now, and just running the game, and for some reason it already triggered. So that's probably part of the reason why it worked first time. Okay, so if I just run this again, have a little look at some of this troubleshooting. So you'll see that it triggers immediately, and I'm not entirely sure why. And as I mentioned before, it could well be that there is another collider that it considers to be inside of itself, either the door itself, or yeah, it depends on the order that they get put into the scene in the physics engine. So what we'll do to be absolutely sure is we'll do what we should have done in the first place and make sure that the collider that goes in is in fact the right one. So this is an easy way of doing things. I've got a player, and rather than check his name, what I'm going to do is give him a tag. So if you see tag underneath the name of the player, you click the untagged, you can go down to player and tag it as player. So we can find things quickly by tag. So the player that we've used here is going to be the collider that comes into the scene. The collider is on this level here, so I'm going to be absolutely sure, and I'm going to tag that as player also. So we've got everything in the player, everything that has the collider here is also tagged as player. And then when we do our check, so we're going to do a nice simple if statement here. We're going to say if, and I double tap tab just to get that to happen. If I say other dot tag equals player, then and only then do we change this bool to true, and it's exactly the same for this. We just make sure that if other dot tag is equal to player, then we want this line in here to be set so that we only do it there if the other's tag is equal to player. So once again, let's test that, make sure it works. Well, it does work after a little bit of troubleshooting. The reason that it fired the first time, believe it or not, is that inside the animator I'd actually left this state set as true, and therefore the first thing it did was open the door. So it wasn't anything to do with the code, and that's just part of the fun of programming, where sometimes you find these things out as you go. So we've actually fixed a problem that didn't exist. So now we are absolutely certain that inside of our very simple code here, the only the player will allow the animator to trigger and open or close the door. So you'll see now as you play this, the game now works as expected, so you can move into the door will open, and as you move away the door closes again. So it's been a fairly long tutorial. I thought it'd be fairly simple, but ended up being a bit longer than normal. Hope you've enjoyed it, and if you've got any requests, feel free to subscribe and comment and give me some requests on other things that you're having trouble with that are seem like they should be fairly simple, and you're having trouble with getting them done in Unity. Good luck.